Yo! Welcome back to One More Mana. My name is Derik, and today we are finally getting into another deck doctor. This has been what seems like forever. Had to dust off the old lab coat and get back to it. And today's deck doctor is dedicated to one of our amazing patrons, Nate Huggy-Bear Fuggins. That is Fuggins with 2 G's. Please do not demonetize me, YouTube. Nate, really appreciate the love and hope we can give some of that love back here. This is a very, very fun deck, and it was really fun kind of going through gold fishing, trying to make these swaps. And it is for Elas, il-Kor, Sadistic, Pilgrim, and Sadistic is the most fitting name for this thing because it is the most sadistic way of just slowly and painfully killing your friends in a way to show them just how much you love them. And I feel that. I appreciate that, Nate. So let's get into this. But I know you're going to want to get some of these cards, Nate. If you want to upgrade your deck, or anyone out there is just like, you know what? I want to be sadistic. I want to love my friends too. Use the affiliate link to TCG Player down below and help support the channel while you get your cards. And speaking of supporting the channel, y'all know we got to get our regular message from Kenneth the Heathen himself talking about why you should rock into the AM, because I know y'all want to look good and feel good while you play Magic, and I am not the authority on that, but Ken is. So Ken, tell them why they should rock into the AM. Well, hello, my name is Kenneth the Heathen, and you know I have to look my best and feel my best when I play my best, and that's rocking into the AM. As a wise man once said, he who stands on the tallest hill is really high up in the air and can see really far, and if he trips, ooh, that ish gonna hurt. Remember, something about dripping in space and screaming. Ken, you are an inspiration. Bring tears to my eyes every time you speak. I love you. Listen to the man, rock your into the AM, look good and feel good while you play, and use the link down below to get a discount and help support the channel in the process. We always do appreciate it. But now let's jump into this deck. And now in the description, you're going to see both the original deck list and the Doctor deck list, so you can kind of go back and forth if you want. During the deck doctor, I'm going to be focusing mostly on the cards that I've swapped in. Overall, I've swapped about 23 cards in, and try to keep a consistent theme of what I was trying to do. Basically, the biggest changes from the initial deck list to the doctored one is I took out a lot of, because there are a lot of just very good Orzhov cards in this deck, and some of the more unfocused ones that are just generically amazing cards, I went ahead and swapped for more focused versions. Really, my goal when doctoring this deck is I wanted to get as many redundant effects for your commander as possible, because when you look at this commander, probably should go ahead and read it. Elas, il-Kor talks about whenever creatures enter, you're going to be going ahead and gaining life. And then whenever creatures die, each opponent is going to lose life. And these are your creatures. So really, the focus of this deck is getting a lot of creatures out to gain life, and then you can drain your opponents when they die. Now, Nate specifically wanted to make this a life gain deck, and I really wanted to focus on that. There are death triggers and things like that in there, but I really want to make sure that if something is benefiting from your creatures dying, that it also has some sort of life game in the process. I didn't want to just make it straight up aristocrat combo, ignoring the life game, when that was kind of the initial purpose of the deck. So I really want to find as many redundant effects that involve creatures entering or leaving, and draining effects, or just life gain effects in general, to kind of just make it so, one, you have the redundancy. If your commander dies, you always have access to that effect, but even better, getting 2, 3, 4, 5 versions of that at once and really get the ball rolling. So I focused on that, in addition to trying to get more token producers in the deck to make sure you can go wide, get all those creatures out. And I put those in kind of in place of a lot of tutors and things like that. As we go through the categories, really, I'll specify what swaps those were made, kind of am I thinking, and then in the game winning step, because I'm going to do a game winning, kind of a mini game winning step for this, I'll talk about the different ways the deck can win in the direction I went, and also how, Nate, you can stay true to kind of that initial build if that's how you want to win, and kind of how to lean into that as well. So you'll have a few different directions to go based on how you're feeling with some of the swaps. Let's go ahead and start with the creatures, and the creatures are probably my favorite part of the deck. You get a lot of really awesome, cool effects in here. Now, I kept the creature count the exact same. There's still 33 creatures. I like that ratio. I found in my very creature heavy decks, having between 30 to 35 allows me to consistently have a lot of creatures while also leaving slots open for everything else. This isn't like a Sadistic deck where you want 45 creatures and you're all in on creatures and only you want every effect on a creature. You can do that, but I don't feel like it's necessary with this type of deck. So I think 33 is a happy medium. Now, of the categories we're going to add, there were some just generic value card draw, card advantage type cards that I feel like are just amazing cards in general, but really synergize well with this deck. And that's going to be something like a Rumor Gatherer that has to do with creatures entering that you can go ahead and scry or draw cards, and something like a Welcoming Vampire along similar lines where you can go ahead and get card advantage just for doing what you do, and these happen to also be on a creature. So I really liked adding those in and just getting that little bit of extra card advantage in the process. I already mentioned the most important category to me were the redundant commander effects. These are going to pop up on the screen, and I'm kind of going through and read these because there are quite a few. you have a lot of options for this, but I kind of focused on some of my favorites, and again, ones that focus on also gaining life. So you want stuff like Suture Priest, you want stuff like Zulaport Cutthroat that's going to do it for you. Marauding Rot Priest involves some of that life gain. You got stuff like Flesh Taker, got stuff like Cruel Celebrant, and all of these creatures are going to do such a good job in this deck of just mimicking your commander and allowing that engine to either always remain going or just start spiraling out of control, really, when you have 3 or 4 of those out at a time. Thankfully, your commander's low CMC or mana value in this case, you can probably reliably hit it, but you don't want to feel like, oh, I'm just doing 1 life gain at a time, 1 life loss for opponents at a time. You want that stuff to really spiral out of control for your opponents. And the last category of stuff that I swapped in was I really wanted some explosive effects. And this is just stuff that I mentioned I cut a lot of the tutors. Now, if you do want to, and as I get into the game winning stuff, we'll talk more about the combo version of the deck. I wanted to have explosive win cons, even though we're not necessarily going to have as many tutors to go for specific win cons. So something like an Elenda the Dusk Rose is amazing. It might not be a combo off finish, but if you get Elenda out with a bunch of tokens or a bunch of creatures, it's essentially doubling your creatures, making you a bunch of tokens, gaining you a bunch of life, and essentially going to allow for you to drain the table. It's a really, really explosive card and can be a finisher in this deck for sure. I also love something like Commissar Severina Rain, one of the Warhammer cards. This just gives you benefits for having a bunch of creatures out. You swing, drain everybody, but it also has a sack outlet, which is super important, that is going to gain you life and give you card advantage, and I really, really love that. You can even use something like Drivnod, one of the new Phyrexian Dominus is whatever the plural is, to go ahead and double those triggers and really let things get explosive. Now, I will say, I did not put in Vito Thorn of the Dusk Rose just yet. If you want to go harder into that Sanguine Bond, Exquisite Blood combo, Vito is obviously an auto include in here, and you can really swap it in with Commissar Severina Rain if you want to go further into that combo, and I think Vito would take that slot. But if you just want to have that combo in the deck, but win with other synergies in life gain, this is kind of the build I would go with. So I kind of put that in a little happy sideboard as a swap in if you want to go more combo heavy, whatever you're in the mood for. Now, moving on to the artifacts. Artifacts are almost the same. The only notable cut that I had was Vedalken Orrery. If that's a pet card, if you love it, keep it in there. I added a little bit of extra ramp with like a Signet. You can cut that Signet, keep the Vedalken Orrery in there if you want it. Really, the 2 most important things in these artifacts, one was the addition of Skull Clamp. In a deck like this, you have a lot of low toughness creatures, and I really did add a lot more token synergies. Skull Camp is so powerful in that it gives you the death triggers for this deck, and then the obvious just card advantage that it's just ridiculously good at doing. The other one I wanted to add was a Phyrexian Altar. Now, this is a bit more expensive, so you can use something like a Spawning Pit instead. Really, I just wanted this to represent another sack outlet as an artifact. Spawning Pit is super, super fun, so you can do that if it's more budget, but if you do have Phyrexian Altar or have access to one or just want to proxy one, it will do a work in this deck because you are going to be able to force those death triggers. Since your commander wants things to die but doesn't necessarily have that sack outlet on it, it's just nice to work some of those in. Moving on to the enchantments, really, again, not a ton of swaps here. The 2 most important ones are going to be Rabble Rousing, which is, I think this is more of a thing that I think is fun. I really like Rabble Rousing, and that it enters, it's a hideaway, so some sort of pseudo card advantage, and it cares about you having a lot of creatures out. And in this deck, you don't care if you want to get a bunch of creatures out, and a lot of times you don't care if they die because you're getting benefit off that too. So you can swing out, get this thing to flip, get that free cast basically, or not flip, but get the free cast and get that pseudo card advantage, casting things for free, cheating mana cost. I love what it does in here. The other one is going to be Bastion of Remembrance. This thing is ridiculous. It gives you a token on entering, and then also goes ahead and is just another one of your commander's effects. Opponents lose life, you gain life. This is probably my favorite redundant effect for your commander because it's on an enchantment, so it's harder to remove, and if there's a board wipe or something like that, bam, you still have, if it's a creature board wipe, you still have a version of your commander ready to go moving on throughout the game. So I love that. Obviously, I'm not touching Exquisite Blood and Sanguine Bond. I'm really curious, easy for me to say, how far into that combo you want to go, and we'll get more into that in kind of some categories coming up. Moving on to the sorceries, I cut a lot of the tutors. I ended up swapping the tutors for really explosive token effects. I wanted to get more ways to just flood the board with your tokens and have those explosive turns. So that's going to be stuff like a Army of the Damned, where you could just get a whole bunch of zombies out and flash it back. In this case, you really don't care that they're tapped because you're getting the ETB triggers, and the death triggers are what you care about. So it is just so good in this deck, and it is sorcery speed, but still very powerful for what it does. Another one of those effects is that basically more or less is doing the same thing, is going to be increasing devotion, where you're getting a bunch of tokens, you can flash it back again, kind of two different versions of the same card. Now, as I'll kind of emphasize again later, if you want that combo version, you're going to have that veto in there, and you can replace these big token producers with those tutors. I think those are the best replacements to make, because if you're trying to go for a combo win, it doesn't necessarily matter to flood the board with tokens and gain a bunch of life and drain your opponents for a bunch. If that's not the way you're looking to win, at that point, these are just inefficient cards. So those are the swaps I made. I feel like this deck does a little bit of both, where you can combo off and you can get those explosive turns. But again, it's whatever you find the most fun, kind of whatever your preference is in that slot. The other sorcery that I did swap that I think is a really good swap is going to be, I swapped out Torment of Hailfire for Exsanguinate. One, I have a personal kind of vendetta against Torment of Hellfire. It's really hard to resolve. It just takes a long time, and I guess I'm just lazy. But I guess more importantly, Exsanguinate is just so good in this deck. It's going to gain you a bunch of life. The thing I love about Exsanguinate is Torment, you basically only want to cast to win. With Exsanguinate, you can cast it at any point to drain your opponents and gain a bunch of life in the process. It could be a finisher, mid-game, a life-saving technique to gain some life, whatever it is perfect, and obviously just a staple. See it everywhere, but I think it is specifically good in this deck. With the instance, I again want more token producers. I went ahead with stuff like Secure the Waste, where you can just flood the board with tokens with however much mana you have. Stuff like Call the Coppercoats, again, to just get a bunch of tokens. That's, again, these are the categories that you can kind of trim if you want to go more combo heavy, but I really think the way this deck is built now, you get that good balance of both, where you can win in different ways. The only other instant I really wanted in here was Generous Gift. This is a deck, not so much of a toolbox deck. I know decks that I play, like my Scarab God or my Feldon, I can put a lot of removal, a lot of just random stuff in there, because I never know what direction the game's going to go. I almost never even know what my game plan's going to be until I get into it, so you want to have answers for everything. This deck reminds me more of like my Titania deck, where it's very much, you know what you're doing from start to finish. It can branch off, and maybe you go that combo route or that big token route or that explosive route, but you know what you're doing. So the slots for removal are going to be a little bit more slim than maybe some other decks. So you want them to be versatile, and I feel like Generous Gift just does a perfect job of hitting exactly what you need in all of those different card types. Moving on to the lands, really, I didn't even make any swaps. With two color decks, I always say just run as many basics as you want and you'll be fine. If you wanted to put in something like a High Market or a Phyrexian Tower, it's not going to hurt you, but honestly, with this deck, with those one-time sack outlets, it's not as important in certain decks. You want repeatable sack outlets in here. So I think just running lots of basics and you have some of the important duels, you're just fine with the lands already. Now, we're going to do a pseudo game winning step. Not always with deck doctors are we into the game winning step. Usually we're just looking to make some swaps, but I do want to talk about how this deck wins the game. I think there's a multiple different routes you can go. The direction I kind of went was that incremental life loss, life gain, to get a bunch of life, to get some of those life gain win cons that you already have in there, like a Felidar Sovereign and things like that. And you can just drain your opponent in the process to keep your life total high, get that payoff, and then also drain your opponents. And it really gets explosive when you do stuff like a Lenda or mass token producers in the process. And by the end of the game, when all your opponents are in the teens and you're at like 70, you're in a great position to swing out and win the game. If you want to go combo-tastic and combo heavy, like I said, with that Sanguine Bond, Exquisite Blood, Veto type combo, go heavy on those tutors. I already mentioned cutting the heavy token producers, get those tutors in there. And honestly, it's whatever makes you happy. If that combo is your favorite thing ever, get those tutors back in, swap that, and the changes to the creatures I've already made, I think will still serve the deck well, in that you'll have those tutors and everything ready for the combo, but in the meantime, you'll have multiple versions of your commander on hand to make sure you have a bunch of synergies going to stay alive up until that point and really keep things going. It's not as threatening as putting 13 zombies out in the battlefield and your target number one, but having 2 or 3 of those drain and gain effects on there will keep you alive and keep your game plan going. Now, the last way, you'll notice a card I didn't talk about at all, and it seems like an obvious just being forgetful in a life gain deck, but it's Aetherflux Reservoir. I didn't just straight ahead add that into the list. I really didn't know if that's how you want to win the game. If so, if Aetherflux is kind of your vibe, throw Aetherflux in there for sure, but it feels like every life gain deck wins with Aetherflux, so I didn't just want to assume, bam, put it in there, but I will put that first cut on the sideboard. If you notice yourself consistently being well above 50 life, and you need that little extra oomph to just knock a player out of the game, obviously just slot Aetherflux in there, but it's one of those where it really depends on how you want to win and what you find most fun about the deck. That is going to do it for this deck doctor. It's going to do it for these categories. I really hope y'all enjoyed it. This is a super fun deck. I really like what it's trying to do. I'm not normally at all an Aristocrats player, so it took me longer than usual to kind of go through, try to goldfish, try to get everything kind of vibing with what I was going for, and it seems like it's going to be a great time. I really hope that you enjoyed it, Nate. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, obviously just reach out. But I think I try to put it in a spot where you can kind of branch off in a few different directions and get this deck to do what you want it to do. As always, we love you, Nate. We love all the patrons. A huge shout out to the patrons. We do love and appreciate y'all so much. Just thank you for believing in what we do. If you haven't already, make sure you go check out the latest episode of Shuffle Up and Play. Yeah, we actually did remember what happened in that game. So it was like watching a whole new episode for us too. It's exciting. There's only like some misplays. It's a wonderful time. It's a great time. So definitely check it out. It was a lot of fun. It's always fun anytime we get to hang out with the professor. And that is going to be everything. We got some more exciting stuff coming up soon. Can't say what yet, but just stay tuned. But until then, I'll see y'all next time.